All right. Today we're going to talk about tort liability. So, tort law is based on a legal premise that individuals are liable for consequences of their conduct or lack thereof when actions result in injury to others. So, there's some main parts of tort liability. The first is duty. So, would the person in your situation do the same thing that you did? And were you following customary practice? The second thing that they look at is breach of duty. So, did you break your duty and did you put someone in harm by doing that? And that brings me to causation. Did it cause harm? And they use the but for clause. So, but for the defendant's action is negligent, would the plaintiff have been injured if it weren't for what the defendant had done? And then lastly, we have injury. So, did the person get injured? And that injury must be proven, or the damages must be able to be proven. So now we're going to look at some cases of tort law in schools. So Mosley versus Portland Public School District was a case in 1987 where a 15-year-old girl, she was attending classes at Jefferson High School, and during lunch she got into a fight with another student, Wanda. And during the fight, that other student used a box cutter and stabbed her several times. There were security personnel on campus. However, there were none in the hallway when the fight happened. So Mosley sued the Portland School District under several theories of negligence and lack of supervision. So, had this happen in my district, I think some reactive measures that would have been taken is an intense investigation of the incident and figuring out why these students why the fight was able to get to the point that it got to. And for the students that were involved in the fight, obviously there would be a due hearing process for the students to come up with the consequences, especially, for the individual who used a weapon in school. The proactive measures that the district would take would probably be having more supervision during passing periods in the hallway and during lunch. So just doubling up on that supervision to make sure that students are safe. And that brings me to the ethics of this, the professional ethics. As teachers, it's our job to keep students safe. So if we are operating under the premise that we are trying to keep students safe, that means we should be supervising students at all times. Another case was Johnson Johnson versus the school district of Millard. So this happened in 1993. A student named Robbie, he was a first grader at Willa Carter Elementary. He was injured during a game of London Bridge in music class. So this was a game where the children formed a bridge by linking their arms, and they kind of swung the third child back and forth while singing the song. During the game, the first grader, testified that he was swung fast and hard, as he said, and he actually asked his classmates to stop, but they couldn't hear him over the music and the laughter. And so the two children that were swinging him, they accidentally let go, and he was thrown into a bookcase and cut his head above his right eyebrow. He needed like 50 stitches. It was very, very terrible incident, and several students testified that during the incident, the teacher had her back turned. So some of the reactive measures that my district would take right off the bat is investigating the incident, figuring out what the game was that they were playing, what the students were supposed to do, what the teacher told the students, what the teacher was doing during the time. They would also probably hold a whole staff meeting about supervision and the importance of making sure that we have our eyes on our students at all times. Some proactive measures that would be taken would be the principals might start doing, walkthroughs just to kind of ensure that, kids are getting supervised at all time, and just to remind the teachers that it is an expectation. And also having physical activities like that could result in injury cleared with admin first before engaging in them. And I went with the same ethics along the lines of keeping students safe because it has to do with supervision. Because had the teacher been watching, this incident probably would not have occurred, because she would have seen that, the boy was uncomfortable and asking to stop. And so as teachers, we need to be keeping students safe, and that means we need to remain vigilant and watching them at all times. All right, my next case, it happened in Anchorage School District. In 2009, a kindergarten student left his teacher and ran over to meet his mom, and in the process he tripped and fell along the way, and he landed headfirst into a clump of pine shrubs. And the stumps and the saplings, they were poking up a few inches from the ground, and one of the sticks actually penetrated his eye socket and jabbed his frontal lobe of his brain. And so the fall caused significant damage and drastically altered the student's life. So the family sued Anchorage School District, claiming that they were negligent in allowing the stumps to remain on a path that was trafficked by such small children. And the court found that the school district was indeed negligent and liable for $4.5 million in damages, plus an additional money for emotional distress. So in this case, my district, some reactive measures would be making sure the school grounds are completely cleared, making sure those pine needles are totally out and gone. Some proactive measures that my district would take would just making sure there's a continuous upkeep of school grounds, making sure there is no, hazardous materials lying around that could hurt students, and also updating dismissal procedures, making sure students aren't running while they are, meeting their parents or going to the bus, and just kind of reinforcing the expectations for dismissal time. And as far as professional ethics goes, I think, maintaining a hazard-free school zone is very important. It's our duty, like I said before, to keep students safe, and part of doing that is maintaining an environment where students are safe from harm. Next, we have a case, Munn versus Hotchkiss School. And this was where 15-year-old Kara Munn was bitten by a tick while hiking in China during a summer trip organized by her prep school. And the tick transmitted encephalitis, and that actually caused neurological damage, and she was left permanently unable to speak. So the family sued the school district for negligence because they didn't warn the parents that the trip might bring this student into contact with disease-bearing insects, and they also failed to make sure that Kara took protective measures like using insect repellent, wearing proper clothes, and checking for ticks. So the jury actually awarded the family $10 million in economic damages and $31.5 billion in non-economic damages. So had this been my district, some reactive measures that we would have taken would be changing the permission slip forms for the next year to make sure they include possible dangers of the trip. Some proactive measures would be, checking students over after all hiking activities, making sure there aren't any ticks in the hair. Also making sure that parents are aware of any hazards during school-sponsored events. So really getting together with staff and talking about what are some things that could go wrong. What do we need to make sure parents know before they sign this permission slip? And back to that, ensuring safety of the students. That is our ethical commitment to as a teacher. And as long as we're doing that, if we're ensuring the safety of those students, we're making sure that Parents are aware of possible dangers that could result in an elective activity. So it is important that we are aware of those things so that we can warn and tell the families. Lastly, I have a case, Flanagan versus Canton. So this is a case that involved a 5th grader, Brendan, at Canton Middle School. So he was participating in gym class, and the teacher noticed that the class was getting rowdy and out of control. So he stopped the class, and then he started lecturing the students on the importance of listening and directions. And after the lecture, the peers were dismissed into the locker room to change, and he stayed behind for a little bit to talk to some students that were misbehaving. And while they were in the locker room, one student pushed Flanagan from behind and caused him to fall into a locker and a bench, and because of that he had severe injuries that resulted in having to get an emergency splenectomy. So because the teacher was not in the locker room during this time, Flanagan's mother sued the school district because of negligent supervision. During this case, some reactive measures would be to meet with staff to remind them of their duty to supervise students at all times. Some proactive measures would be to see if we can maybe get paras or other people to help out during the end of PE to help supervise students in the locker room, because as a teacher it can be hard if you're dealing with students who need, dealing with a lot of students and trying to make sure people are safe in the locker room, and if you're still having to pick up after students in the gym, I can see how that, one person, that might be hard to do. So seeing if, for that last 5 minutes that they can get coverage so that there's more than one adult in the gymnasium and locker room area. And as far as ethics, it comes back to that supervision, constant supervision of students. It's so important that we are keeping our eyes on our students at all times. Kids are quick, they can get hurt very easily, and it's our job to make sure that we are eliminating all risks that we possibly can. So there you have it. That is everything that I have on tort liability. Thanks.